Hello and welcome to the All Saints Church North Worcester Life Group and to our An Evening With series. My name is Brian Mason, and on this occasion I'm delighted to welcome a very dear friend of mine. We've known each other some years, and so it's great to have you, John. So Jon Cox, welcome to our time together this evening.
Thank you, Brian. Great to join you.
Now, what I'd like us really to start off with, because Judith and I, and we've known you for 25 years of the 30 years, I think, that Adventure Plus has been in situ, and you as the founder and the CEO. Then why don't you just fill everybody in with what Adventure Plus is? That might be a good start if you're happy to do that.
Well, you and I both know that we had a clue that might come up. So I've got a few pictures which perhaps if I share them might just bring things alive. So I'm hoping that you can now get a sense that Adventure Plus is all about encouraging young people, particularly in the UK at this stage, to embrace the adventure of faith. Can you see that on your screen?
We can, yes.
Excellent. And this was this whole idea was in response to a completely unexpected calling. It was never my plan, and it was great to hear Sammy sharing just before we started that she's also got an exciting project on. It wasn't her plan. She has no plan. It was God's plan. And I very much felt that that's exactly where we were at the start of A+. But to sort of paint the picture quite quickly, because we've got a fair amount to get through tonight, I'll share that if my computer will allow me to share, a bit of a sort of introduction, if I may, to who I am. And I can't possibly introduce A+ without introducing Tessa as well, my better half, my wife, who was involved at the outset. I thought by way of capturing a little bit of an intro to me and Tessa and the family, I might just borrow some pictures from an interview I was asked to do with British Canoeing just recently. So there's a bit of sort of canoe theme to it, but it'll bring out some of the adventure that we've been embraced in. So if you're okay with that, we'll crack on, and then I'll tell you a bit more about A+. So here we are. There was definitely a very fine Scottish accent among your guests earlier. So here we are on the top of Loch Tay as a family, and we've got a 5-day trip down the river. So we can see Emily in the front of this boat and her younger sister Lucy behind. And I'm aware that I've got quite a job on to take my family on this 5-day trip. Emily's pretty chilled, but it's quite an adventure ahead. And towards the end of the loch, you can see the waves are really picking up, and this picked up the theme for the whole trip, actually. That's now Murray being introduced, who's our son, who's currently now working as a biochemist in California. But quite a full-on trip that we shared together and a lot of fun. As we get on to talk about A+, you'll see it's not just about canoeing. So we also managed to take groups out to the Swiss Alps, and it's wonderful to share time with people out there. But I am a canoe and a kayak coach, and so I put that one into those photos. But by way of a sort of an adventurous intro, I did just share with this British canoeing audience an experience that we had in Canada where I was invited out for my sister's 40th birthday. She lives in British Columbia. And I went out with my son Murray. Here he is, aged 11. And they thought, now what would Uncle Jay like to do while he's out here? I know, we'll book him in for some whitewater rafting. And I thought, I'm not going to sit in the bus. If I'm on a big river, I'm going to write to them and say, can I please borrow one of your kayaks and give it a go? But I didn't realize this was the largest whitewater rafted river in British Columbia. And it was quite an adventure. These are quite big rafts. And this thing's getting absolutely thrown around. And in a minute, we're going to go down this in a kayak. But you can see, if it wasn't for the sort of centrifugal force, my 11-year-old son would have got absolutely swamped by the other guys in the raft there. This experienced raft guy is definitely getting thrown around. It's quite dynamic. And then the kayakers come down. So this guy was pretty cool, not very friendly in the bus on the way up. But just as we started to get onto this, it's quite a macho world, the outdoor world in a way. As just before we then entered this rapid, he turned to me and said, John, it's about now I start getting butterflies. And I'm thinking, what? You're the expert. I've never done this before. So here he is having a lot of fun. And then it's the Brits' turn. So this is me within about 30 seconds of being on the first bit of white water that day. This was really not the plan. At this point, things actually it went absolutely silent for me, apart from a sort of dull rumble of rocks being rolled around. I'm in that picture as well. And at this point, I'm thinking, John, this is really not the plan. A roll would be in order about this point, if you could just pull one of those off in this crazy water. Thank you, God. I'm sure a prayer was involved at that point too. But here I am coming up out of that wave, the right way up, but backwards, thinking, oh my word, what's next? That was just the first 2 minutes of this whole river. And it was a fantastic day. But I far prefer this is Loch Tay, the same stretch of water as we saw in that early picture of my family who had rotten weather. But this is with a D of E group there. It's just wonderful getting people of whatever age out into the beauty of God's creation, and that's definitely something we'll be picking up as the interview goes on. I far prefer a more ordered approach to adventure activities, even when there are some challenges ahead. I'm also a sea kayaker, but the loneliest one in the country because I live in Oxfordshire. And the last member of our family that I haven't introduced is Anna, our oldest daughter, here gamely taking part in an adventure race for Adventure Plus, which involved biking, running, and canoeing as well. So that's the fam, that's the intro. But let me tell you a bit about A+, because that was the real question. But I hope that's given just a little bit of insight into who we are and what we do. So as you say, A+ has been going for 30 years. We've worked with well over 100,000 children and young people now. In 2018, we worked with 8,000, and then it grew by 1,000 in the year before lockdown to 9,000 children and young people. We have about 200 volunteers, only 16 full-time teams, so we're pretty busy working with those numbers, and 4 different approaches to adventure youth work, because it's not the same package for any type of young people that we're working with. So that's one organisation, and that's about 30 seconds on A+. So if I may, I'll just unpack those 4 approaches to adventure youth work. Is that okay?
Crack on.
We love what our patron Bear Grylls says about us as being one of the best charities out there for encouraging young people to get out there, grab life, and live boldly. And the biggest chunk of what we do is what we call group adventures, and that could be schools and youth groups. I'm going to race through these, but it'll just capture the work before we talk about the thread that I'd like to pick up later, as you know, which is God's faithfulness behind the whole story. So about 7,000 of the 8,000 were folks coming to us with their school, their youth group, church groups, local community projects, all kinds of different activities. This is at another centre that we work at. I can't remember who was with us from Sussex tonight, but this is actually at Ashburnham Place, which is one of our associate centres. We're not in the adventure capital of Europe here. We're in Oxfordshire. So we have to make up the adventure wherever we go. So this group is one of our holidays, wanted to abseil, and we were in Wiltshire. And we found a disused railway bridge and reckoned if we parked the Land Rover on that bridge and attached some abseil ropes to the tow bar and then the robust metal bumper at the front of the landing, 2 teenagers, with all their effort, won't pull the Land Rover over on top of them. And it worked. And I had double checked it was a disused railway bridge, of course. But I love this picture because it really speaks of friendship made when you're out adventuring together in a positive, encouraging and Christian environment. So that's cool. We're quite creative in a lot of other ways. So we do a lot of team building. This is the only 4-way tug of war I'm aware of in the UK. It'll take 130 young people, or we reckon 100 adults safely. So great for some corporate team building type of work. And then we run expeditions right across the country. This is a D of E Gold expedition back on the River Tay again for a school in Oxford. We take the serious business of having fun to heart in the training of our GAP team. So it's not just about taking folks out and keeping them safe and getting them on the water and taking them off, but we really want them to have a great time when they're out with us. So this is a classic instructor games pack. Well, okay, packing the trailer at the end of the session may not go quite according to plan, but they're clearly having a lot of fun. And then there is a Christian ethos to what we do. So for every school that comes with us, we offer them a thought from a Christian perspective each evening. So that's the first of our sort of strategies for youth work. That's group events. Then we got a specialist unit working with young people at risk of exclusion and social service referrals and so on, which I will race through again, but often a creative approach to adventure activities is needed. Well, this is an unusual approach to canoeing again, but it's an absolute trust activity. If you don't both lean right over at the same time, you're in the drink. And bushcraft is a very popular and very, I'd say, therapeutic element to our Adventure Impact programme. A guy called Richard Louv in the States has coined the phrase nature deficit disorder. And actually, young people in an urban environment, if they don't get a chance to get out into the beauty of this wonderful world God's given to us to enjoy, they've also coined the phrase vitamin N, or the nature vitamin. It's a trace element, if you like, in our lives that we fail to thrive if we don't get that exposure to what we would describe as getting out in the beauty of God's creation. So that's key. We love this quote from one of the mothers of a 14-year-old that was referred to us, which I'll just let you read as I take a swig of coffee. So that's hugely encouraging. And what's even more encouraging is the feedback from both of those first approaches to youth work, the group bookings and then Adventure Impact referrals, is that at the end of their stay, when we give them a feedback form, there's a very clear pattern to two of the answers to the questions. So when asked what was best about your stay, it could be absolutely anything: the biking, the boating, the food, getting away from my annoying little sister for the week, whatever it may be. What was worst about your stay? It had to end. We had to go home. So we're getting young people at risk and young people from mainstream schools who wouldn't normally go on a Christian holiday saying, we want to come back, we want to do more. And so we say it doesn't have to end. You can come back, come and join us for our Total Adventure Holidays, Brian, which you know about, and I'm sure you may unpack in a bit. But just to pick up the fourth element of our Adventure Youth Work. So Total Adventure Holidays is great because we can then invite children back who've come with their school and been surprised how much they've enjoyed it and been welcomed by our instructors, all of whom are committed Christians. Back to that serious business of having fun. Our strategy here is to give them such a great week that they want to come back every year and come back as leaders when they're older. And if we can achieve that, we've been a thread of encouragement right the way through those teenage years. As I've already indicated, it's not just summer activities. We've seen a fair few of those, but to get young people out into the beauty of, we managed to hire a chalet each year in the Jungfrau region of the Swiss Alps, which is absolutely stunning. It's youth work. Well, it's stunning. So that's the north face of the Eiger behind us. That's where we're skiing. But this is Onesie Wednesday, and Tessa is the only one who's respectably dressed. Fair enough. She's quality control. But we love it because the Swiss just don't know what to make of us because they're so competent and everything is just so. And then we appear on the slopes and have a lot of fun. So, yeah, it's youth work, as you can see. So, yeah, this guy found himself on the chairlift with these two, and they really didn't know what to say. But, we had a great time. There's a story of real encouragement with this lad here who's from a complex home background, and he wasn't going to wear his onesie on that day. He wasn't going to mess around. He was too serious and all the rest of it. In the end, he did. And, he loved it so much he wore it the rest of the week when we weren't even in onesies. Right, I must move on. So the fourth element of our Adventure Youth Work is then our instructor training and discipleship gap year, which we call internally Distill, because it's important to distill at the start of the year what you want to get out of that year for God, but also it stands for Discipleship Training, Instructor and Leadership Program. So here are the guys, we train them pretty hard in the first part of their year. Here they are on expedition training. Here they are on canoe and kayak training. One of my favourite parts of our syllabus for that year is what we call being out there in Him. So by definition, if we think into John 10, Jesus shares that his followers, his sheep, are in his hand and no one can shake us out of his hand. We're in the Father's hand and no one can shake us out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. So by definition, when we're out there in the beauty of his creation, we are in him, we're in his hand. And there is so much we can learn about the character of the Creator God from his creation. So you just grab a concordance and flick through and see how many references there are to key elements in God's creation throughout his word. And it's just peppered with references to water, the stars, and the cosmos and the heavens, light, fire, rock, hills, and mountains. And I love to unpack that. What can we learn about the creator of the God who created these wonderful elements? So, yeah, we train our guys pretty hard. If you press me, I'll tell you the story about the guy who's in midair there, but I'm going to move on through for now. But that's a real example of someone who was encouraged. And here he is arriving for his baptism, and he bombed the vicar. That just sort of captures his background, if you like. But, he came to us on our gap year, and this is him getting baptized halfway through. That's just fantastic. Yeah, we push our guys quite hard. So Steve is clearly out of his comfort zone. He is already a canoe instructor, but suddenly you take him on moving water and it's not quite so controlled. And this is Johnny, his good friend. He's on the same rapid, but he came out of it backwards, but had a real adventure in the process, and we still chuckle about that. I'm going to pause there, Brian, because, but I hope that's captured something of the work of an A+.
Well, buddy, whistle stop, that was for sure.
Sorry.
Now, look, your arrival on the kind of outdoor adventure scene was thanks to adventures of a different kind. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that kind of personal side and some fairly significant nudges from God?
Well, I will, but you're going to have to all turn your screens off because I'm going to race through a load of pictures to get to some illustrations of that. So this is a little bit more about the centre we're building. You're not looking at this, guys, obviously, but this is a teaser for what's coming, I guess. Right, here we go. So whose idea was it anyway? How did we get into this approach to adventure youth work? Well, as I said, it really wasn't my plan. Back in another life, in another century, I didn't know, this is my own story here, what I wanted to do when I left school, but I did know that I wanted to travel. And I felt two ways of doing that might either be, and these sound quite contrasting, join the forces, and I went on the Admiralty interview board to join the Royal Navy, which I passed, or to do study nursing and then travel with that. And that was the first time I ever really, I think, brought an issue that felt important to me to God in prayer. I just read a book that had been sent to me by my godmother, which I'm sure many of us will have heard of, called The Cross and the Switchblade. And in that, you know, you read that the pastor absolutely is in a high adventure situation in the Bronx of working with the gangs in Harlem in New York. And he was constantly bringing things to God in prayer and seeing answers to prayer. And that really spoke to me. And I thought, well, you know, having read that, even though I grew up going to a sort of very average local parish church, faith had never really been personal for me. And I thought, well, this is important. And at one level, either life is just a huge conveyor belt, and we, you know, hopefully if things go well, you may go to university, get a good job, marry a beautiful lady, have beautiful kids, grow on through, they all go to university or apprenticeships or whatever these days, have a good job, marry beautiful people, we drop off at the end of the conveyor belt. Or I want to be part of something bigger. And so I literally, David Wilkerson style, got out of my bed one evening and prayed and said, Lord, this is your chance, because I'm now offering this direction to you. So, you know, don't miss this opportunity, was my appalling attitude. But should it be the Royal Navy or nursing? And I really tried. I prayed for at least 4 minutes, Navy or nursing or the Navy. And I half manufactured a vision of a warship ploughing through the water towards me, or a syringe, low-flying syringe heading for me. But I didn't get any vision or anything like that at all. And I kept praying for another 2 minutes. And then I gave up and went to bed. And I sort of thought, well, God, you've had your chance. But as I then sort of stopped trying, I just had this immense sense of peace and assurance wash over me. I didn't hear a word. I didn't see anything. I just knew that I was going to do nursing and that was the right thing to do. And so I applied and got in. Fast forward 4 years, the reason I did nursing was because by this time I qualified and I was working in the casualty as a staff nurse. But I obviously remember wanting to travel. and I ended up in Sudan as a health teacher and community development worker. And that was not an easy place to be. So this is Sudan as it was then. We now know that there's a border roughly across here with South Sudan. But then it was just one huge country that's almost the landmass of Central Europe, so almost too big to govern. It was an area that was under military conflict, and so it was already starving and a place of real hardship for the people living there. And then one day we heard a radio call from the head office in Khartoum to say that hundreds of refugees had been seen fleeing over the border from Ethiopia into our area of Sudan. Can we do something? And I haven't got time to go into the remarkable answers to prayer that we saw there, but all we could do was pray, because there was no spare resource in the area to feed these extra hundreds of people. We didn't know how many hundreds they were. And I'll just share two examples of God's provision at that time. So it gets very, very hot during the day. It was the hottest place on earth. Over 50 degrees it touched while we were there. And at night it got perilously cold. So we needed shelter, but there's nothing in the area. And in a warehouse that was scavenged every day by beggars just looking for food that had fallen out of sacks from grain that had been grown in that area but been bought up by merchants and shipped up to Khartoum, where people could pay more for it. So that's an interesting economic debate. And so they would just find little sort of grains of sorghum or millet or whatever to make a bowl of porridge that evening. In the back of one of those warehouses, we found enough tents to house 1,000 people. As Steve Connor, one of your previous interviewees, would do, he would punch me on the arm and go, "Mere coincidence, John, don't let it build your faith." But, you know, this was quite remarkable. There were a number of other absolutely amazing answers to prayer in a place that was already starving. And we were able to provide wonderfully for those refugees. And as a result of that, when I came back to the UK at the end of my year, I was really encouraged and enthused in my faith. And I happened to meet a mate from school that I hadn't seen for 5 years while I'd been doing nursing. And, you know, we got chatting, and he asked me what I'd been up to. And I shared some of the adventures of God's faithfulness in Sudan. And some adventures actually working in a casualty department in Whitechapel in the East End of London. And I said, "How about you, mate? What have you been up to?" And his face just drained of any energy and enthusiasm. He said, "John, there's got to be more to life than this." He wasn't an employment casualty at all. He had been employed ever since school, but had a weekly paid job. So on a Friday night, he had a wad of notes in his back pocket. "Well, hey, guys, drinks are on me," kind of thing, which is fun for 3 months, but this is 5 years on. And the contrast between meeting a relatively intelligent mate of mine, 5 years on, age 23, already bored with life, and us, the way we'd seen God answer prayer in sovereign ways to save thousands of lives, really drove me, a not overly spiritual young adult, I have to say, drove even me to prayer. And I prayed about it that evening, and because the thought wouldn't leave me. And the sort of response I got was, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" And that is where that calling, which we started with, of encouraging young people to embrace the adventure of faith, really came from.
One of the things that we've talked about in Life Group is sometimes a destiny scripture or a destiny word that has turned around our life, or suddenly there's a whole new route to take at a crossroad. And you'll be pleased to know that I've read Life to the Max from cover to cover, and I noticed there's one very significant word that very much changed you and your family's life. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, John?
Well, Brian, amazing. So I'm going to give you two, because I didn't know you were going to say that, and I just flicked onto this next slide. So the day when we got that news about these hundreds of refugees crossing the border, there was nothing we could do, but we did have a morning thought. And the verse that I brought to that thought, as I said to the team, all we can do is pray, was here from Isaiah: "Before they call, I will answer. While they're yet speaking, I hear their prayer." And, you know, then we saw those amazing answers to prayer. As I say, I don't have time to tell you all about them now, but it's okay. Thank you for flagging it up. There is a book about it. So then fast forward, there was this remarkable calling to, there you go, there's a book about it. That's cool. So this calling to establish some sort of outreach to young people through adventure. By this stage, we were working as youth workers in central London out of a reasonably well-known church there, All Souls Langham Place. We were student workers youth workers at a community centre in the area there. We felt that it was right when I graduated from my degree in environmental sciences and Tessa was just qualifying as a trainee solicitor, to embrace this challenge and go for it. Don't get a proper paid job, just try to set up an adventure centre from a 2-bedroom flat in central London. I don't know how you do that, but that again speaks of God's faithfulness. But Tessa was qualifying. I'd finished my degree. We needed to move and out of London to where we could set up an adventure centre, and we didn't have a clue where that might have been. We were actually talking to the people at Ashburnham, and might it be that we would set up on that property, but that wasn't to be. Our target was to be within 90 minutes of the telecom tower, or roughly 90 minutes of the telecom tower, because we wanted to be accessible for groups from inner London to come to without a 4-hour drive to the Brecon Beacons or the Peaks or the Malverns or the West Country or wherever you might go for adventure activities. And we got charity status within 2 months, which was again a phenomenal answer to prayer as a result of a completely unexpected conversation with a solicitor who worked in that area. Again, there's a chapter about that, because that fast forwarded things probably by about 18 months, which was essential because we were not paid during this time to set up this charity. And having got charity status, we then just started to tell people about the calling we felt we'd had. It was very difficult to speak with any conviction because it all sounded completely surreal. How do you set up an outreach to young people as two totally unqualified, you know, recent graduates in a 2-bedroom flat in Camden, Westminster border? So some friends were generous enough to invite friends to have a bite to eat, and then we could share our vision. And at one of those evenings, we did exactly that. And we said the key answer to prayer is we need to know where we need to go to set this charity up. And we want to be about 90 minutes from the telecom tower. And we prayed. Well, in fact, the host suggested that we prayed about it. And we thought, that's a great idea, except we had already been praying about it. But, you know, a bit more prayer can't do any harm. I apologise for the attitude. But when we finished praying, one of the guests at the meal, who was Canadian and didn't know England particularly well at all, said quite sheepishly, because it didn't make a lot of sense to her, while we were praying, she said, I heard a word very clearly, and it's not a proper word, but I feel I should share it with you. And we said, well, great, thank you. What was God saying to you? And she said, well, you'll think I'm mad because it doesn't mean anything. We said, never mind, just tell us what he said. And she said, Windrush. And Tessa and I looked at each other and said, yeah, no, thanks. It doesn't mean anything to us either, but thank you for being brave enough to share that. But the hostess was in the next room and overheard, and she sort of called through the doorway. I still remember it, quite almost brusquely. What did you say? And she said, Windrush. And she said, but the Windrush Valley in Oxfordshire is absolutely what you're describing. It's about 90 minutes from central London. We know the mayor of this little town called Whitney that's built on the River Windrush, who happens to be a committed Christian. Maybe you should go out and meet him. And that was quite remarkable. I borrowed a car later that week, having arranged to meet Andrew Carter, who generously arranged to meet this unlikely character from central London. And a year later, we moved out, or less than a year later, we moved out to Whitney, and that is now where Adventure Plus is based. And when we first came here, Tessa shares that it's amazing. You know, neither of us had heard that word, but, you know, in fact, we now live opposite the Windrush pub, which is very convenient. But there's the Windrush Leisure Centre. At the bottom of the field opposite our house is the River Windrush. And the GP practice is the Windrush Medical Practice. We'd never heard of it. This lady had never heard of it, but she was brave enough to speak out what God had shared to her. So, you know, that's a lesson for us all, I think, and was really formative for us as a family.
Well, absolutely. John, I remember when I had a little time with you as a trustee that Adventure Plus operated more as a kind of satellite organization. In other words, you kind of occupy a school for a total adventure week, or
Yeah, yeah.
you'd go onto a campus, and so you'd travel the country in a way. But then in recent years, there's been a kind of remarkable move. Why don't you just briefly tell us how suddenly now Adventure Plus has got its own home in Clanfield?
Well, I will happily do that, Brian, but please avert your eyes because you're going to be getting another heads up. But I'd love to show some pics. While I'm doing that, I suppose I could have stopped sharing if I'd been more technical. I'd love to pick up again some answers to prayer along the way and the plans that we've got. So when you were a trustee, and thank you and Judith for your support over so many years, absolutely brilliant. Even with the wry way you sometimes have corrected me and advised and encouraged, always with an arm around the shoulder. Brilliant. Thank you, sir. We began actually, we didn't have any sort of real resources. We moved out here, and Oxfordshire's not a cheap part of the country. And so we rented, we started off from our spare bedroom, and then someone, as our oldest daughter arrived on the scene and kept picking up the other extension when I'm trying to raise some money and some credibility for a new charity, our curate offered us a tiny little attic office in the church administration zone, and we absolutely sort of bust out of that. That was in the days when Mac and Jan were with us, Brian, as you'll remember. And we absolutely bust out of that into rented offices and a barn full of toys. So we, as you say, had to hire a school or a village hall, wherever the adventure was, or go into schools to run activities. But actually, if we trace our growth, since we started, we got charity status in 1990, we grew quite slowly through the 90s. And then by 2000, the year 2000, we were working with 1,000 children and young people a year. And then it just went ballistic. It doubled in a year to 2,000, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6,000 children and young people we were reaching any year. And lives were being transformed. So we wanted to continue to reach more. And we just couldn't punch through that false ceiling of working with about 6,000 children and young people, because our business model operating out of rented accommodation was saturated. And then in about 2013, the directors at the time took the brave decision to embrace the challenge of trying to find a property to build an adventure centre. But when I did the figures, that's a pretty stark indicator. And our justification for raising funds to try and buy a property was that we felt that if we could buy a property and move on, we could double the number of children and young people that we work with. And without wanting to race ahead too much, we managed to buy a property in 2015, even before we've built anything on it at all. So it's just a farm with land at the moment and a house for our gap year team to live in. The numbers have crept up by 1,000 a year in the run up to 2020. So clearly it's going to more than double the children and young people we reach. Have I got your permission to share what we're going to do on the site if I race through?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, here's an answer to prayer right at the outset. Our shopping list for that land was quite challenging. We wanted to ensure that we had enough space to get out in the beauty of God's creation, because you could run all of our activities on 2 soccer pitches. We needed mature woodland for bushcraft, buildings for so that we get planning permission to build an adventure centre, close to placid water for canoeing, houses on site for our gap year team, and then in Oxfordshire and affordable. And you put those last 2 on either side of any equation, and you can pretty much forget it. And we did find some properties that would fit the bill, but nobody would sell to us. And we wanted to buy the freehold to secure this outreach into the future. In the end, in desperation, I rang the owners of Windmill Farm and Windmill Farm Conference Centre, a Christian conference centre locally, to ask if they might sell us this 50-acre field with mature woods and disused barns. They were at the time living in Shetland, helping a church up there. They left a skeleton crew to run their conference centre. And I ran them completely out of the blue. We ran activities from there so they knew us. And I just said, Richard, lovely to hear you. Oh, Jonathan, lovely to hear you too. How's Tessa and all that? Might you be interested? I'm sorry to call completely out of the blue. But might you be interested in selling that 50-acre field with the barn and the copse and the stream running down here? And he said, well, Jonathan, obviously we weren't expecting your call. They own all the other hundreds of acres all around. So it'd be right in the middle of a busy agricultural operation. We had no idea you were going to call, but I'll talk to Rosemary, my wife, about it. And if we think there's a conversation worth exploring, we'll be in touch next time we're back in Oxfordshire. I thought, well, I'm never going to hear from them again, not with regard to this, so I'll carry on my property search. I was amazed to hear his voice on the phone the following Monday morning. And he said, Jonathan, we were gobsmacked by your phone call. And I said, I know, ridiculous, wasn't it? Why would you sell us that field right in the middle of your farm? And he said, no, you had no way of knowing this, but we had a family meeting just last week and our children are all now grown up. No one's taken over the farm. No one's taken on the conference centre. We decided just last week, we're moving after generations on this farm. We're moving from Oxfordshire up to nearer the children in Yorkshire. So you buying this field in isolation doesn't really work. It'll only work if you buy us out of the whole operation, including a ready-made conference centre with sports hall and other facilities. So this was where the adventure base was going to be. This was the plan for what was going to be on those fields. But now there was a whole lot of other resources, which I haven't got pictures of, but that was just amazing. However, unfortunately, then the property was valued at £2 million. And we said, well, there's just no way. And they said, well, what about if we sell it to you for 1.3 million? And we said, well, yeah, thank you, but there's just no way. What about if we sell it to you for 1.3 million, but over 3 years? So you can, if you raise the money, a third of it, you can move on to site and start to develop your work. And that effectively left us 3 years of trying to raise £500,000. And it was still far more than A+ realistically ought to have been taking on. But just something in us felt this was a unique opportunity and we shouldn't just walk away from it. And again, I would love to tell you some stories that we don't have time for. Apparently, there's another book on the way. But we have seen God's faithfulness time and time and time again. It ran to the wire every 16th of October, which was the deadline each year. But in the end, we have bought the freehold. So where A+ was worth about 80k because we owned a few minibuses and a couple of fleets of canoes, we now own and have secured a £2 million property. It's not about the money. It's securing this opportunity for outreach for young people for generations to come. And that's so exciting. So we've got roots in urban youth work. So there are some really fast growing urban free sports. So parkour, skating and scooting and BMX. It just happens we met the top parkour, or one of the top parkour experts in the UK who happens to be a committed Christian. He wants to help us put in a brilliant facility. BMX is now an Olympic sport and our bike providers are offering to support the pump track for that. Skating and scooting, really popular. Yeah, more of that in a minute. Other plans, we plan to put in the only inland artificial coast steering facility in the UK because we can't be further from the coast than we are. And there's a lot of children locally that haven't been to the beach, but we're really excited about that. And you know, it's our site, so we can do what we like. I'm a kayaker. This is a fun way to launch a kayak. And this was the best seal launch illustration I could find or picture I could find on Google for 2 boats. We're going to need one for 20 boats and we can do it because it's our site. We're going to have a lot of fun. We recognised when we moved on site that we'd need to increase the size of the copse for our bushcraft. And so pretty much immediately we wanted to plant trees. Another little aside, within 2 weeks of being down there, I was talking to a guy about this. I've never really known anyone particularly into trees per se, except within 2 weeks of being down there, I'm sharing we want to put trees on. And he said, well, I'll put in 1,000 trees. And it turns out that he owned a nursery that supplies trees to garden centres all over central England. Absolutely amazing. This chap here then offered to buy 500 trees and closed his factory down for 2 afternoons if we could run a team building afternoon planting trees for the site. We've had all kinds of characters planting trees. This man sadly only had time to plant one, but he had a very shiny shovel. And we were really grateful to have a visit from the Prime Minister, who was also our local MP. So wonderful. To keep it affordable, we wanted to put accommodation on initially in the yurt village. More of that in a little while. Great, Brian. So I've got to tell you this one. So year 3 of trying to raise £500,000, we've missed a slide. Never mind. This is the punchline. The owners came to me and said, this was the field we bought. That was the conference centre. We're putting these 3 fields on the open market now. You can buy them if you want. And we thought there is no way that we could buy those fields as well as trying to raise £500,000 this year. And amazingly, a farming family from up near Lichfield heard about what we were doing, and they came and said, that is make or break for you guys, because I was getting calls from property developers to put houses on here to continue the village. That's make or break for you guys. We will buy those fields, praise the Lord, and lease them to Adventure Plus for 20 years with an option to purchase them for A Plus at a peppercorn rent. And when the lease came through, the rent for those fields for the next 20 years is £1 a year. Thank you. That's an absolute rescue package. And what I love about it is we can't take the credit for that. This is absolutely God's faithfulness stepping in when it was well beyond our control. Here's another one. So these are 3 power lines across the site. This is where we want to put the lake for our adventure base, but this is the SSE site showing power grids. They have agreed to bury the power grids and reroute them around the lake for us, which is about £500,000 worth of work. Again, thank you, God. That is quite remarkable. The whole site has been surveyed by this absolutely top-end survey company, absolutely free of charge after a conversation with one of their MDs. That's a survey they've done for us, which would have cost over £10,000. Absolutely amazing. And then last summer, another little answer to prayer. We are about the only, I think, pretty much. I know of one other organisation that ran Christian summer camps last summer, but most providers felt they couldn't do it. We looked at the guidelines. We spoke to Thames Valley Police and got an inspection about our plans, and they felt we could do it. They said it's exactly what our young people need. But we couldn't meet indoors, and we needed shelter because one week it was very overcast with torrential rain, and the second week it was bright sunshine and we needed the shade. And we were the recipients of this donation just beforehand, which gave us an outside, but then we couldn't have afforded that last summer with such a crazy year. That was from a church in London, and that's £5,000 worth of marquee that arrived the week before. So praise the Lord. Thank you, God.
John, you've sent many minds buzzing, I think, not just tonight, but we'll make certain that this recording goes out far and wide. But we're going to, when we switch off the recording, then we'll have a Q&A session. But just before we do that, just one final question, just for a brief answer, if you would, is that I know that your main focus is obviously young people. And just the way that's stretching is brilliant, wonderful. But you talk about a conference centre. Just tell me just a little as to how you'd see A Plus possibly having a partnership with a local church. Just tell me how you think that could work itself out.
Well, there are lots of ways actually. So I think it's a truism that the value of a journey isn't in arriving at the destination, but it's taking the journey. And we're absolutely at a point now where in 10 years' time, young youth groups, for example, will show up at a really excellent adventure centre, which they know will be there. But actually now is the time when we are completely dependent on, yes, God's people to support this, to enable it to happen, but also God to answer prayer and provide. I was about to share another remarkable story of a guy at a men's breakfast that I was speaking at who pioneered the technique of poured concrete climbing boulders, who just happened to be at this really small men's breakfast. And it turns out that he's got a top-end company in the next town. And he's offering us those poured boulder poured concrete boulders. You know, those meetings don't happen my mother, who does a lot of work in really difficult parts of the world, talks about the phrase of the divine coordinator. You know, God puts people in place, and it is quite remarkable. And I'd love to get young people engaged in the journey now as we transform this empty farm fields into a really wonderful high-end adventure centre. So different ways of getting involved with young people. We're pioneering a thing. Oh no, we're not pioneering. We've started a program called fundraisers, not fundraisers, but fundraisers. Any youth group, could be a primary school class, a Cub or Scout group, a group of families with children, a church youth group, can have a lot of fun telling people about the adventure base and raise a bit of money. Do a car wash on a Sunday after church, put on a gig, do a bake-off, walk from here the length of the Malverns, whatever it may be. Raise a bit of money, but tell people about what we're doing. And then as a thank you, we'll bring the youth groups together on site for our fundraisers, celebration and prize giving. Do a free afternoon's activities, end with a barbecue and award prizes to groups that have obviously had the most fun, telling people about the adventure base. What that'll do...
Yeah, I mean, just the other thing, just to say, is that I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago, just a small detachment from All Saints came over and actually had an adventure day with you, canoeing and archery and bushcraft and so on. I mean, is that the thing that you'd see perhaps your conference centre being able to be used for things like that?
So, yeah, so that's youth group. So we've got our first With Dad weekend happening in the first weekend in July. So that's using our new facilities. We are also then we've got a fantastic offering for church weekends away, because we've got a camping field for young families who maybe are into the new wine model, where they can go camping as a family, and that's more affordable. The youth could stay in our new yurt village that you just saw some pictures flicking past there. And those that need a bit more comfort, but it might cost a little bit more, can stay in the twin ensuite rooms of the conference centre that are now on site, because that was all part of the deal of what was sold to us. So absolutely, our church came to us, Brian, before we put the yurt village on. We had 130 on site, but we've now added an additional 80 beds in our yurt village and our timber lodges. So yeah, that could be hugely exciting.
Wonderful. Well, I feel breathless. I don't know about anybody else. So Jon Cox, we're so grateful for this time together and just telling us more and more about God's remarkable work on campus. And for anyone who wants to know more, then either through our particular connections or simply just going online and looking at the whole Adventure Plus model. So Jon, we appreciate your time and thank you again. Thank you.
Well, thanks guys for inviting me. So much to share, so little time. Maybe I'll come up to Worcester sometime, or as you say, Brian, come down to see us at Adventure Plus.
Okay, thank you so much.